Welcome back, this is Crossbeats Production, and you're here with Nate28, and this is another beat making tutorial. This particular tutorial is about how to have things in phase and to avoid phase issues. So this piano that I have in this track, I've actually got this track on another tutorial that I've played earlier, but basically I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how to find things that are out of phase and how to fix that issue, and also how to listen out for stuff that are kind of out of phase or that may be in phase, but other things that are within the track that are creating phase issues with the instruments that you've got in your mix. So this particular, I keep saying particular, I need to stop saying particular. This track, I believe, is a piano track. So let me play the track to you, and I'll just turn off all the things that actually, let me leave that on. I'll turn off the thing that I found to help this phase issue, and I'll play the track and you can just have a listen to that. So here it is. Alright, so as you probably would have seen here, let me just see if I can turn on the view. I'll just put that on medium. Okay, so the low end part of this track right here, as you can see, it's quite high in the low end, and that piano has a lot of low end because of the actual sound that I've created with that piano. And as you can tell with the low end on the track, it does interfere with other things. When you have low end on any track, as far as interfering with your, say, this piano and the bass, or the piano and the kick, anything that has low end, a lot of things do have low end, even vocals have low end. But the thing that I discovered with this particular track was that the piano was interfering with other things in my mix, and especially with things like the console shaper. A console shaper basically does a couple of different things, but this console shaper is supposed to replicate the same kind of way that, for example, SSL console would work. That's what I'm told to believe anyway on this console shaper. So as you can see, there's a lot of noise, and the console shaper has got a crosstalk function, noise, and drive. So this tutorial isn't so much about this, and I can get into another tutorial about the console shaper itself, but the main reason why I want to show you the console shaper is because I have crosstalk on. This function here allows each channel, as you can see on the console itself, I don't know if you can see it right now, but with the crosstalk, basically it allows each channel, actually if I unmute that, now you can see it. So each channel has a little bit of noise across the channel itself. So as you can see, when I turn this off, that noise disappears eventually with the noise. There we go. Okay, so the noise itself will disappear from each channel, but basically the crosstalk allows each channel to have a little bit of the other channel within that channel. So if that makes sense to you, basically each channel is feeding from itself and also feeding from the other channels that are surrounding it. So there's kind of a little bit of mixture of all the stuff together. So basically that on itself you want to watch for phase. But I do have this function turned on my mix, and as you can see, it's creating a bit of noise, and you can see that in the spectrometer where that noise sits in the mix. That gives a bit of that thickness, the fullness to the mix that I guess a console would give in that sense, and that also gives you an understanding of where it's sitting within the mix, so you can see it in the spectrometer that I've got here. So I'll just turn the noise off just so I can avoid interfering with what I'm actually trying to do right now. So the reason why I wanted to create this tutorial was to show you that you can listen out with keen hearing to hear out what is in phase and what's out of phase. And there's a really kind of simple trick that I use myself to hear what I find in phase and what's not in phase. So this particular mix console has a little mono button here which you can use, and you can use that on your actual audio interface if you've got a mono button, but I find this one to be the most relevant and accurate when I'm switching to mono and stereo, because it doesn't interchange. Actually, it's interchangeable when I should say it's interchangeable with the level or the volume of my track. It doesn't alter that at all. Whereas on my UAD, my mixing Apollo Twin, when I switch that to mono, and I'll show you what I'm talking about, on the console, you can actually switch this to mono. When I do that, for some reason, it increases the volume of my track, but maybe because that's summing to mono, and who knows, for whatever reason, it does that. Anyway, but this is the quick, easy way to switch to mono, and that's what I do when I listen to my pianos, or I listen to anything, actually. When I mix my track, I put it to mono, and I just listen to really, really low volume, and I try and make sure that every single thing in the track is kind of level and where it's need to be sitting in that track. So without further ado, long conversation, but let me just play the piano and I'll just show you what I'm talking about, and just pay attention to the low end frequency on the piano. Now, as I click through, just listen to the low end. Okay, so without looking at any of the meters, what I wanted you to listen to is the openness of the piano. Now, when I say openness, I'm talking about, I don't know if you can hear it, but on the video, but what I'm hearing here in the studio is basically the piano starts to open up, and the body of the piano within the center frequency starts to feel like it's more alive and spread out. Now, it's in mono, so it's really, it's kind of a unique thing you have to adapt your ears to when you're listening to, and it's not an instant thing that you probably hear if you're not used to hearing things like that. But when you start to flick the switch there with the mono to, sorry, not mono, but you increase, I'm basically increasing the width by about 5%. The standard width on this is 100%, so when I'm turning that off, I'm just increasing the width slightly, but not too much, where if you notice on the correlation meter, so if you watch this meter here, it doesn't really change that much with the correlation. Okay, so the correlation pretty much stays in the same place, but when I'm flicking between the two settings, in my mind, I can hear the difference between the piano, and I can hear the way that the low end frequencies, especially down at this 100, down to even the 60, 50K area, I can hear that the low end starts to spread out a little, but it's not spreading where it's phasey, it's spreading where it feels like it's part of the track. And that's the kind of thing that you're sort of doing as well. Not so much spreading the low end when you're using a compressor, but when you're using compressors, you're making the dynamic range more perceivable to the ear. So, not that this is compression, but the same technique, I guess, with the way that you would listen to a compressor when you bring down the dynamic range and you bring down the ceiling, and then you're trying to create a more even sort of sound with the compressor. So that's what I've tried to do with this piano. I've listened to the piano, I've put it in reference to the other tracks on the mix, and I'll just play this to you in a second, but I've put it in reference, and I've listened to it in mono, and I've listened to it in stereo, and the way that I found that it sounded when I adjusted the binary pan to this 105%, I just felt like it really just sat a whole lot better, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a sec when I play it in stereo, but let me just play it in full context of the mix. Okay, I can explain what it sounds like to me. It sounds like when the binary pan's off, it feels like the mix is being choked. And that's the kind of sound that I'm talking about. You don't want your mix to sound like it's being choked by any other instrument in the mix. You want it to sound like it's open, free. Every instrument's got its place within the little box. If you put an imaginary box, basically, say for example, this is the box, and you're listening to everything, and you've got things panned left, you got things panned right, you got things in the center, in the middle, and then there's the stereo plus and minus. So basically, if you're looking at the piano when I play that piano, that's spread out everywhere. So you can see that that's got a position in the mix where it's spread to every direction of the box, if you're looking at a box in that sense. And if I mute that, solo the kick's down dead center, but it's got a bit of noise. It spreads out from sides. And if I just turn this mix off, okay, so if I put the snare on that, you can see that snare goes a bit to the right hand side, and that's where I've got that snare pan, just so I'm not interfering with when there does become a vocal in the center here. And you know, throughout the mix, basically I've got things panned how they need to be to create that stereo width. But the whole entire point of this tutorial was just to give you guys an idea of, you know, for one, listening out for things that are out of phase and trying to hear where they are in the mix and trying to hear the instrument and getting to know your mix. Like, that's one key important thing that I've found within mixing, is to really understand where instruments are supposed to sit in the mix, and understand that, for example, like a piano might take up where a vocal would sit, or a kick might take up where the low end bass would sit. So trying to understand, you know, whereabouts in your mix that certain things are going to fit, and trying to accommodate for everything, and not overcrowding your mix because, you know, you want a certain instrument in there but it doesn't actually really need it. Like, that's what I found in this particular mix. I found that I was working with another synth over layering the piano itself, and I found that at the end I didn't really want that synth because it created this phasiness to the piano and the whole entire track that I didn't really want in the mix. I wanted it to be clear and crisp. So there's just little things like that you can sort of, you know, start to understand about your mix and work around, and just, you know, experiment and use things like this binary pan to mess with the phase on your tracks and make it wider or make it more narrow, and just understand where that's at. And the other thing is, you know, when you've got this phase meter, it kind of tells you a lot as to where your track is and the phase of the track. So the other thing I guess you could also look out for is with the, you know, when I actually print this piano down, so right now I've just got this in the MIDI form, so it's not printed down, but, you know, when you do print it down, especially with the phase with your kicks, for example, now this is a stereo kick, so you can see the phase is absolutely correct on that because there's no issue with that. But you know, if you introduce the second kick and you layered your kick, you know, you could see that on this particular kick, for example, if I had a second kick here and these two lines, so that line and that line, say that didn't line up and they were slightly off, and they were both, say one of these was at this position here, so, you know, you could have phase issues with your kick. So you can start to hear when certain things have a phase issue or a phase correlation issue, that they either cancel each other out completely, or they start to just create this weird sound that it just doesn't sound right. I can't really explain it other than it sounds like it's being restrained or restricted, but in that sense you'll start to learn when you hear things in phase and out of phase, and, you know, experiment with everything you've got, and just try and understand your mix a bit more. And I hope this helps you out, and if there's other tutorials or other things you need to do with mixing, be sure to hit me up in the comments, because I'm happy to do whatever I can to help you guys out, and just really also teaching myself in teaching you guys, because it really helps me to learn from other guys' mistakes and also my own. So if there's anything else, let me know, but otherwise, hope you guys have a good night, and peace.